Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Sunday Sit Down. I'm Reverend Phil Dieke, one of the clergy on staff here at White Rock United Methodist Church. It's my joy to welcome you this morning to our pre-show for worship here. We do the Sunday Sit Down each Sunday as an opportunity to sit and kind of gather. Think of it as the opportunity when you walked into the church back in the day and you had the narthex there and you got to kind of like mingle with people. We don't get to mingle a whole lot anymore. So this is our mingling opportunity. And so I get the opportunity to sit down usually with one or two people each Sunday morning to have a conversation. Last week we had Bill Holston talking about immigration and the work that he does with Human Rights Initiative. And this week I have a very special distinguished and honored guest. The Bishop of the North Texas Conference is joining me. So Bishop McKee, thank you so much for joining me.
Glad to be here.
If you don't know polity of the United Methodist Church, the local church is where much of the ministry happens, but then every local church is a part of a district, and then districts make up a conference, and conferences are part of a jurisdiction, and jurisdictions in the United States, and then they go on to make general conference. And so we are under the North Texas Conference in the Metro District, and each conference has a bishop. And so our bishop in the North Texas Conference for the last, how many years now?
8.5.
8.5 years has been Bishop Mike McKee. And so the only place you've been in episcopacy has been here in North Texas.
That's true. That's correct.
You were at Hearst before, over in the mid cities between here and Fort Worth. And so I've had the honor to know Bishop McKee since pretty well about the time you started here is right when I went through the ordination process. And so we had a lot of fun conversations. And so I've been honored to have you as my bishop the entire time. And I'm grateful for that. But I wanted to invite the bishop to come join me this morning. 2 weeks ago, we had Jenny Mislin talk about some spiritual resolutions for the new year. And so I reached out to the bishop and I said, I'd love to be able to talk about some resolutions you have for our conference and for the denomination as a whole. And so he willingly accepted my invitation. And so First of all, if you want to give any more introduction, I welcome you to do so, just for people who maybe aren't familiar with you as our bishop and where you're coming from and what if I didn't cover anything in the role of the bishop, feel free to include that. But then I really want to give you an opportunity to just share on some things that you hope and resolutions you have for the church.
I like to frame it. It's not we're under the conference, under the bishop, but that we're partners together in terms of ministry and what happens. And so I see myself as a steward of the ministry of the 300 plus churches in the North Texas Annual Conference, not to any micromanage things, but there are things that we do together that no one church can do alone in terms of our witness, in terms of reaching people for Christ. So I want to realize that, for instance, all of our clergy are not members of a church. They're members of the annual conference. That's their church. Just want to be clear about what that really is and that kind of thing. So I do have supervisory responsibility for clergy, that the district superintendents really are party to that as well. Mm-hmm. So it's good to be with the people at White Rock this morning, and I've worshiped with you a couple of times, and look forward to doing that again in person at some point when that may be.
Yeah, hopefully sooner than later, but not too soon, right? That's the fine line there.
Things. You don't want to rush this about, just opening things up, because there's one thing I've been really concerned about, is that none of our churches become super spreaders. And
and maybe we start there, right? I know there's a lot of churches, not Methodist churches, and some maybe United Methodist churches too, but that have said, we're not going to shut down, we're not going to close our doors. The church is never closed. And you pretty quickly came out and said, one of the first tenets of what it means to be United Methodist is do no harm. Yeah. And you stuck to that pretty hardcore. And so what was your reasoning behind that?
It's sort of interesting. I've been reflecting on the last, and when we get to about the middle of March, it's going to be a year. So we're about close to 2 months away, 10 months into this. And I never thought that would happen. But the last flight I had was from Nashville, Tennessee, that second week in March. This thing was starting to come undone, even at the General Council Finance Administration meeting. I'm the president of GCFA, which is our financial arm of the church. And so we were cognizant of that. We're cognizant that we're all going to be getting on planes. We heard about some things that have been happening already. But the last restaurant I ate in person was in Nashville, Tennessee. I've not eaten in a restaurant since, but I was really concerned about this. And, but I did not begin to think it would break as quickly or as fast or as deeply as it did. And so I think that next week in March is when we decided to suspend. I don't like to use the phrase closed churches, but to suspend public gatherings for worship and everything. And simply because it becomes a way in which that became spread. When that happened, I thought, we'll be in by Easter. In 2 weeks, I was disabused of that. Yeah. And I will say that I never to get really hopeful that we would get in quickly after we got to Easter, and we were not able to do it. I didn't think we'd be here at this time, but when 350,000 people in our country died, and our hospitals are overloaded, and saw that several hospitals today, I read in the Dallas Morning News that they've decided to postpone no elective surgery, nothing of that, because this is the big challenge, is that we simply don't have the hospital capacity for something else, which shows about something that's different. But do no harm. I'll go back to that. The way we started that is, there are 3 general rules. I mean, there are many more general rules, but they can basically be do all the good you can, do no harm, and stay in love with God. And so I think that we don't realize that sometimes that the things that the church may or may not have done or chose not to do really would have created harm. And I'm well aware there's times that some of our clergy have said to me, well, some people said they're going to go to another church until we open back up. And I thought, finally this becomes for the greater good for me. And so I'm not comfortable that this is still going on. I'm comfortable with the decisions the conference has made, and we've done this very lightly. The difference today than 10 months ago is that therapeutically we know more than we did. We know the things that we need to practice to ensure that and there's no absolute assurance on this deal.
Sure.
Ensure that we are safer than not. And so we've been clear about capacity in terms of a place, social distancing, and of course wearing a mask, no singing, all kinds of things, which really this is what I'll say about United Methodist. I've gotten some mail, and I'm thinking if they're not email, I'd get less, because people, if you have to write a letter or send it makes it a little more difficult. But what I'd say is that I think people have really been wise about this. They know that this is serious, especially in county, and some of our counties it's really bad too. So I didn't make a decision, okay, we're going to do this for 3 months. It was a month at a time. Wow. And I think looking back, I don't know if that was premeditated, but I think it was the better way to do it, because it sort of gave people, okay, we've got to live into this in a way. And so that's what we had to do. We're still living into it.
Well, and so, do no harm, but also do good, right? There's still plenty of good that's happening in our conference and in churches. And have there been things that you've seen and been really impressed by local churches that are really innovating or continuing the wonderful work they were doing, even though not meeting in person?
So I think there are 2 or 3 things that strike me that are very important. One is that I think that we have probably created more small groups by doing this, simply because people wanted a connection. And I know this may not be ideal, but to be honest, we didn't see our grandchildren and daughter and son-in-law in Los Angeles because we didn't travel, they didn't travel. Mm-hmm. And so we have to realize we have these kind of tools that we're using today. I think we're on Zoom or some WebEx, kind of thing that we're videotaping this on. But what I'm saying is that you still have a way of connecting. It's not ideal, but as a way of connecting. So 10 years ago, we would not have had this even.
Right.
So it has helped churches decide, okay, we can start any number of small groups. They've done that. They've done some very good work with that. And I think it'll be a way in the future that people go, I don't have to get dressed, come home from work, eat a quick meal. I mean, I want people to get dressed on the Zoom. But I don't have to worry about getting to the church. Yeah. For an hour Bible study, an hour and a half, and then going home. And by the way, do the parking lot meeting. Mm-hmm. And what can be accomplished in about an hour and 15 minutes this way, generally we've taken 2.5 hours. Yeah. And so I think it's been helpful for working parents. Totally. So I think that's the first thing is the acceleration of the number of new groups. And I do think this is important in terms of our life together. The second piece, I think it has attuned us in a different kind of way to the needs of our community. I'm talking about the larger community, for example, right now. So you can't live in Dallas, for example, and not be aware of the impact this has had on terms of people going hungry, the number of homeless people, the number of people who just cannot get adequate health care or get tested at this thing. So the thing is it's not like the conference started anything. We just blessed everything we could and held it up. So the amount of testing that was done because of some folks in the annual conference down in the southern sector of Dallas, that was helpful. Number 2, I wish if we'd have thought then that this would have been this long, it'd have been interesting to know how many meals that our churches served. Yeah. 21 counties. I bet it's the tens of thousands of meals. And the other thing is the kind of partnerships that have gone on between churches and those kinds of what I would call acts of mercy and those kind of missional pieces. And I think that's helpful. And it sort of helps us realize, we're not, no one church is in this alone. And the good thing is we can get people from other things. I will say that a natural disaster does the same thing. It happened after the tornado a little over a year ago. And when I saw Christ Foundries, they sort of organized the work day. And it was interesting to see our Spanish speakers, leading that effort and communicating with people from basically some very significantly wealthy churches or people who it was a great mesh of culture. So I think some very good things have happened that'll be helpful. It is also, in terms of our journey toward racial justice, it has slowed down our programmatic effort on that, but it has not slowed down our work on it. I want to hear that. It's like we've not been able to do the things in local churches that we wanted to do in this, and so we're having to punt on that. But one of the things that's happened is that we've all been much more attuned to what's happened in terms of racism in our country. I think that's true. And in healthcare, sort of Methodist Hospital Board, and we don't talk in terms of racism, but it is highlighted, for instance, I think the need to look at healthcare in a very different way. Because, for most of us watching this, it's not a problem. I mean, other than if we get sick, we know what to do. But it's a challenge for people who do not have the kinds of insurance we do or the other kinds of resources in order to get health care. Yeah. So I think it's so small groups. We've been able to sort of do some things missionally and that kind of thing. And I do think it's made us aware of things that are really wrong. And the reason why I speak about that is because John Wesley, is one of the things he did is he, especially in Bristol, he was really concerned about the community. And so he thought in terms of living in his own discipleship, and those are the Methodist societies at the time, we really had to do all the good we can. And we talked about that with the general rules. And so they were a great provider. It's how children learned how to read. It's how the Sunday school got started. It's because of people reading. It's how people got treated for primitively, perhaps in some respects, for their health care. And lastly, you got to remember that Wesley was one of the first advocates for the abolishment of slavery. Right. So I think if there's anything I'd say about this time, it's like this has been a recovery of who we really are. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Like, say a little bit more about this, right? Like, what does it really mean to be United Methodist? You talked about kind of acts of mercy, and you're also talking and you're mentioning things that are way more beyond mercy and really seeking some justice opportunities here. Will you just share a little bit whenever you think of what does it mean to be United Methodist and going back to Wesley, but also like moving forward? What does that look like for you? Yeah, well, if you think that early on the Methodist societies in England were abolitionists, once you get to America and after the church got started, there was not a Methodist church, just societies in England, the first established churches in the American states after the Revolutionary War. And so I think there was this abolitionist motif, but that got to be even problematic, even it was just a North or South thing. We forget that slavery has also happened in the other parts of this fledgling country as well. And so it sort of got dropped. But I do think it's important for us to realize it's not, I don't want to call it a cliche. I don't know what else to call it, but, give a man a fish, he eats for a day, teach a person to fish, and he eats for a lifetime. So there's this whole thing about systems or justice responsibilities that really sort of gets to the point at which we are able to, provide levels of entry into the playing field or into the abundance that God's created for all of us to have. I'll never forget when I was at a church I was serving, and we were doing significant things in terms of mission to the community. They were all good things. They made us feel good. Mm-hmm. People appreciate them. So I don't want to discount in any shape, form, or fashion. But then we begin to think about, how do we help people move out of this cycle of poverty into a place where we don't ever have to give them a bag of groceries again? Yeah. And I'll never get at a meeting and somebody said, what will we do with all this food? And I go, well, that's a good question. And the goal is that we never have to give out food again. Now, now I'm talking about living into the heavenly kingdom in some respects in that way. But on the other hand, we have to have a vision or focus an outcome, a desired outcome at some point. And so I think that coming out of this, I hope that we do, especially in the communities in which we have in the North Texas Conference.
Yeah. Everything seems so hyperly politicized at this point, right? And so I'm wondering, how do you respond when people come back and say, well, now we're just making it about politics? And
Yeah.
I'm teeing that one up for you there, Rule.
Yeah. Well, I guess what I'd say is I think this is one of the things I've said from the get-go is I realize that our clergy sometimes are on the front line about getting any of that pushback about certain things. And so I think, and other clergy know that I've said all along the difficult things that I would have our clergy's back in terms of being supportive. And I really mean that. I never felt like I could have ever counted on that. That's not an evaluation, it's just a description, but I wanted to make that clear, and it was important. So when I said, okay, so I generally answer a question like this. If it's one-on-one, it's like, okay, so for you, it's a political act. Tell me though, if it makes sense that as a Christian engaged in the common life of our country, that do we just give out food? And I'm just using this as a simplicity we're talking about. Or do we find out a way in which we get to the point where we never have to do this again?
Yeah.
And the thing is, it's like nobody wants to come and ask for a bag of groceries. They just get to the point where they're doing it. Nobody wants to come and say, it's like, okay, it's like what honors everybody best?
Mm-hmm.
And, Jesus did say, I've been reminded about this, the poor we will always have with us. And I said, that's more an indictment on us than it is a description about the people who are poor.
I agree. Yeah.
And I think we like to place. It gives us sometimes it gives us a way out of not doing the difficult stuff. I've always been very concerned about this. This has made me much more concerned about these things. So.
Wait, what has made you more concerned about these things?
Since the pandemic's made me even more concerned. I mean, I knew this, but somehow I know this in a different light.
Yeah, I mean, you told me once when we were chatting before that the pandemic has really pulled back the veil on some things.
Oh yeah, it's sort of like Dorothy discovering the Wizard of Oz and throwing back the curtain.
Sure.
And so, I do think that I don't think anything will return to normal.
Yeah.
Normal's what was. It's sort of like you travel down a road and it's like, okay, you're here now. We know more. We also know that we're capable of more, that we have more capacity than we thought in our churches. So what are we going to do? Knowing what we know about what's on the ground, knowing what we know about what we're really capable of in terms of generosity, what do we do next?
Yeah.
So I think it's a great story. So it's sort of like, and I'm going to botch this quote from T.S. Eliot, but basically it's about, we've got to learn to speak in a new voice.
Yeah.
And so I think, or to listen to a new voice. And actually, I think this is a good thing, is to learn to speak and listen to a new voice. And that new voice, I would say, is the Holy Spirit, who's moving us and prodding us to a new place.
That's perfect. It ties in really well. We're starting a new series this week, and what we're going to talk about today in worship also is the gifts of the Spirit, and how each, the Spirit gives all for the common good, right? And everyone has different gifts, but the Spirit is the one that's providing those gifts, and it takes all those gifts that we have to really do the work of the church and continue the body of Christ. And so yeah, I think that fits really well.
So if people talk about hearing the voices of God, I think given the situation that we're in, the voices of God have maybe been the cries of those who suffer. That may be the voice of God. It's listening to the cries of those who suffered the most.
Oh man, making me think of Cain and Abel and the blood crying out from the soil, and take me to church, right? Here we go. Yeah. Okay, so we have a couple minutes left here. We're going to do this as a two-part, so you're going to come back and join us next week as well. Next week, I'd like to look a little bit more kind of at the denominational, global level. Like, what does this really mean for us going forward as a denomination? And, there's probably some things you can't say, or maybe you don't even know at this point of what's going to happen because we're still in a pandemic. But right now, like, what are the things that you really hope and have aspirations for our conference, again, going into 2021 and hopefully whenever we come out of this pandemic, What are one or two things that you really hope that we as a conference are either known for or really engaging with very heavily?
Well, this is, in talking to my colleagues and everything, this is one thing I know. They were in much better a position in any number of ways than many annual conferences. I should say it that way. And when I say it, it sounds almost like bragging. So I've chosen not to engage in conversations the last several months about the health of the North Texas Conference with other people outside the conference. But I do want to affirm what in good health we are in. And by that, I mean, yeah, we have some struggles, but financially, it does not look like we're in the significant kinds of struggles that other annual conferences are in. I want to say that. So that's a good thing. Secondly, is I have never, I have never been more proud of the clergy at any time in my life than I am right now. And that is because people have just learned how to pivot and just roll with the punches. And okay, we tried that, it didn't work, let's try a new thing. And it's just, I think the creativity, and I do think creativity may go back to the very beginning of the Hebrew narrative. In the beginning, God created, and it's like, this is the Spirit's helping us create all kinds of things. And we will have learned some things. And by the way, we will always be online from now. Most of our churches will be online, as well as doing physical worship. So it's not, we're going to go back to what is. No, God is calling us to a new future, and then we're going to do both and.
Amen to that.
I think it could exponentially create more opportunities for us, both for discipleship and for mission.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, amen to that. That's something that, I've been hoping and wishing for the church for a long time, is to really engage in digital spaces way more. And I never thought it would take a pandemic to force us into that, but I'm glad that people are pivoting to it and embracing it.
Well, we never dreamed there'd be a pandemic.
Yeah.
And so the other thing is the good thing is, I mean, it's not, if there's any good that comes out of us, it has actually accelerated the change that was going to have to happen anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And it made us catch up in a lot of places where we hadn't caught up thus far.
Yeah. And the other thing is people realize, I've been so opposed to this, and this. And now we can say, all the things that some people were opposed to turned out to be the very lifeline.
Yeah.
In terms of being a member of a covenant community.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to wrap this one up. You're going to come back and join us again next week, and we'll chat a little bit more, again, at the denominational level, and talk a little bit more maybe about what it is to be Methodist and some of these different aspects. But thank you for your time. I'm really grateful for your leadership in our conference, and that you'd be willing to take the time to join us for the sit down this morning. So
thanks, Phil.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
I wish I could be in person.
I know, me too. All right, everybody, go grab a cup of coffee, whatever you need to do before worship starts. We'll be back in just a couple minutes. Thanks for joining us.
Have a blessed week.